Welcome to TEMPLARS Through the Line, our responsible business podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Lami Adekola today. He's the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at EnterpriseNGR, which is a member-led advocacy group focused on the financial services and professional services sector. Welcome, Lami.
Thanks for having me, Zelda.
Yes, indeed. And today we'll be talking about social impact and the bottom line, a professional services industry viewpoint. All right. But before we get into that, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you do at EnterpriseNGR.
Yeah, I'll be very happy to do that. EnterpriseNGR is a policy and advocacy group established by industry stakeholders to basically be the voice for the financial and professional services sector in Nigeria. And for us, our North Star is positioning Nigeria as the premier financial services center on the continent. And basically that comes with a lot of work. We've set out with 5 key priority areas, which one of them actually is social impact based type goals and all. So the first one is financial inclusion. We have digitalization. We have regionalization. We have investments and trade. And we have sustainability. And for us, ESG is sustainability, but we go a notch higher than just ESG. We tend to look at talent as well, and how can we build sustainable systems in the FPS space. And for us, we think it's not by mistake that the most developed economies in the world have very, very strong financial and professional services sectors.
True.
It's actually because their financial and professional services sectors are strong that they're developed. And we want to position Nigeria as such. And we're member-led, we're member-funded. We have members from across the broad spectrum of the FPS space, and we're happy that TEMPLARS is a member as well.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And we've certainly enjoyed that collaboration. And, it's from working with EnterpriseNGR that we know that you're the right person to have this conversation with today. So let's kind of, unpack this a little bit for our audience, right? So when we think about social impact, right, we think about, creating some kind of positive change in society or doing something that will address a societal challenge, right? Mm. Initiating a program, implementing a plan, taking some kind of action. Now, for many in the FPS space, they immediately hear social impact and think CSR, corporate social responsibility. So long as we've got 1 or 2 CSR activities planned or programs in our financial year, then we've ticked the box for social impact. Is it that simple?
CSR is critical. And for me, I would say we need more rather than less CSR. So I would encourage as many people as possible to keep going with their CSR. But the reality is social impact is a lot more than just CSR. Organizations globally are beginning to realize that to remain sustainable and profitable in the long term, social impact must be a strong consideration. And organizations are beginning to weave social impact into the fabric of the organization itself. So into strategy formulation, into actual goal setting, social impact is embedded, because you're then taking a look at the effect each of your tangible and intangible actions have on society.
Which sounds, like a fantastic prospect, right? If you're not just thinking about these isolated charitable activities during the financial year.
1 or 2 charitable things.
Right, exactly, right. If you're actually building it in as part of your strategy and long-term plan.
Exactly.
But what would you say to the cynics out there who would say, but how do I assess it? So you've told me that you've built this into your strategy, into your long-term plan, but how do I actually assess your social impact, given that you are in reality a for-profit entity?
Yeah, so there are entities that focus on direct impact, so I'm an impact-driven entity, and profit might be secondary. There are not-for-profits like us that we don't focus on profit, but we want to see positive change in the environment, and they are purely profit-driven entities. But across the 3 spectrums of different types of organizations that exist, I still believe social impact is critical and can actually be profitable. But it goes to, how do you now assess this? And as I mentioned earlier, it's what is the tangible and intangible impact of my actions on society. So how many jobs am I creating, for example?
So how many did you reach?
How many did you reach? What is the quality of improvements I've created in people's daily lives and things like that? And actually putting that in your goals from day one. So embedding it into the corporate strategy, into the goals you're setting, and saying, oh, look, aside from the profit-making agenda that you have or do not have, but what impact am I having? So ESG broadly, but the S in the ESG, taking that into consideration in all you do and measuring. So it's not just setting the goals, but measuring those goals and enforcing and ensuring that it happens. And that's where the world is going today. So it goes beyond just organizations, but the entire world. We're members of the World Alliance for International Financial Centers, and the conversations globally is around how can finance be more impactful in ensuring sustainability globally. So it helps.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're right in terms of that's the way the world is moving. And globally, at least in the Western parts of the world, maybe not so much in Nigeria and Africa, we're certainly seeing what we would call consumer movements towards responsible businesses. So you do see, especially with the rise of social media, right? You do see communities saying we will support X business because of the social impact they have, or we will boycott this business because they've had a negative impact on society, right?
Exactly.
So there is something tangible there. And when we talk about assessing it, presumably you're building it into your strategy. There must at some point be a review cycle, right? And as part of that review cycle would even be who is benefiting, right? So you talked about how many am I reaching? Who is benefiting from this? So if we're thinking around that, who is benefiting? How are they benefiting? How at EnterpriseNGR, right, are you looking to kind of address those assessment criteria? So what's the approach, right, of the group?
Yeah, so for us at EnterpriseNGR, we're a policy and advocacy group. So we advocate amongst our members and amongst the general ecosystem of the financial and professional services space to basically include social impact into their thinking. So it's the social impact mindset. But aside from our advocacy work, we're also trying to be the change that we preach. And one of the key areas we've tried to do that is through the Youth of Enterprise initiative. So we hear about the employment problem in Nigeria, unemployment problem in Nigeria.
It's a grave one.
Yeah. And the fact that there are a lot of graduates that are unable to get jobs, but there's also an employability problem.
Absolutely.
Which is, there are a lot of jobs out there that cannot be filled because the young people are not skilled enough to fill those positions. And the Youth of Enterprise initiative is targeting that. But it goes beyond trying to help young people. The organizations are also benefiting from it because they're getting quality young interns work in the organizations. They have 6 months to test them out. And basically, most organizations are now beginning to unbundle their recruitment as in first stage recruitment programs because it's not necessary anymore. And we're saving them costs from impact. And all. Another one we're doing is the LEAD-P. So it's a leadership development program in partnership with the Ige Mokwede Foundation and the Office of the Civil Service, Head of Civil Service in Nigeria. And basically it's taking next level leaders in the civil service and placing them in private sector for a 5-week program. And in those 5 weeks, these people are learning the private sector ethos, but are also co-mingling with operators so they better understand from the operator perspective the pain points. So when they become leaders, when they become heads of parastatals and stuff, they know the pain points and can not just empathize with the operators, but basically think from the operator's mindset.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're talking about is giving them a commercial perspective on governance, right?
Exactly.
And so that will have a tangible social impact. So for example, when they're putting in policies, when they're making new regulations, they actually understand the commercial objectives behind those who have to comply.
Exactly, from the lens of the operator.
Exactly. So that's somewhere that we can see and feel that real social impact, And I think about some of the things. Templars, we're a law firm, professional services advisor. And I think about some of our initiatives here. So for example, we tend to be very people focused, right? So we support the Women at Risk Foundation. We support the Boys cricket, tournaments, Sickle Cell Foundation, and a number of others, that kind of thing, right? And that tends to be because we are a people organization, right? We don't create or produce the tangible. We're not in manufacturing, so our value, our workforce, it's our people. And so a lot of what we do is people-based. But when you look at the spectrum of professional services, right, you do have that sense of, we don't manufacture anything, we don't produce anything, So how far can we take our social impact? So what is some of, like if you were advising FPS sector in terms of creating social impact, and new initiatives, what are some of the things that they could be looking at?
Yeah, I think the brilliant thing about the sector is the cross-cutting nature of the impact we have. So Templars, for example, advises clients in oil and gas, to agriculture, to construction.
Completely across the
every
sector.
Sectors of the economy. And because of that reach of the FPS space, it means we can be champions for a cause. And the cause in this case is social impact. So the sector can, in our advisory work, in our day-to-day activities with other subsectors and other sectors of the economy, push the agenda of social impact. So you're advising your client and you're like, oh, what are your social impact objectives here? You've mentioned some beautiful CSR type objectives that Templars does. But in addition to those CSR objectives, what are the actual, in the fabric of the work you do as an organization, what is the social impact mindset that you have? So it's more of the mindset and us going beyond CSR to it being part of the day-to-day operations and thought process.
It's interesting you mentioned day-to-day operations, because I think it's time for us to tackle the elephant in the room. Financial and professional services firms, we're profit-driven. How do we strike any kind of balance between bringing social impact into our day-to-day professional services and our bottom line? Because at the end of the day, we are profit-driven.
True. And Zelda, you touched on it a little bit. So the world is changing. Gone are the days where social impact is, they're very charitable, they're nice organizations and
big donations.
Big donations and stuff. Gone are those days. You touched on it there are consumer groups. There are people beginning to say, I would work for that company because of the impact this company is having. Top quality talent making a decision to work for an organization purely based on the impact they have. Top quality consumers, customers saying, I like the impact this organization is having on society. I like the fact that in all they do, they're creating jobs, they're improving financial inclusion, for example. More Nigerians are beginning to take up insurance, for example. Insurance penetration was at 0.3%, but because of the work they did, it's moved to 1%. And because of that, in the longer term, it is profitable to be socially impactful and having that mindset in everything you do. So it pays to do good. That's how I put it.
That's how we strike the balance, by just believing, do good.
Not just believing, it goes beyond believing. So I'm trying to look for actual examples that we can give. So you take an organization, financial inclusion, both of us agree that it's an impactful thing to do. To get more Nigerians
we have a large unbanked population. Financial inclusion is critical.
So about 40 to 45% of Nigeria is unbanked, right?
Correct.
And I come up with a solution to be able to bank about 20 or 30% more Nigerians, right? getting to the rural areas, getting the right kind of technology there, getting simple technology that they can use, and maybe not based on our smartphones, but based on USSD and stuff and all. That viable venture can be very impactful because you're solving a problem. Aside from that, there are a number of global financiers today that what they look at goes beyond just your bottom lines in terms of profit alone, but they look at, oh, how impactful is this business? How many jobs are you creating? How many unbanked are you serving? And based on those other considerations, they make a decision to give you funding at reasonable prices and all. So,
which is a very important point, because that now raises this idea that bottom line is not the simple profit that we understand it to be, at least not in today's world anymore, right? So historically, we've always taken profit to be actual profit. We've taken it to be ROI, return on investment, and we've taken it to be shareholder value, right? But the concept of the triple bottom line, a phrase I absolutely love, is becoming more and more popular, even though it's not new. It's actually been around since the mid-90s, but it is now taking on a new popularity, and it's a different way of looking and assessing your profit, even if you are in a for-profit business, right? So the triple bottom line looks at what they call people, planet, and profit, right? So you're looking at the environmental, you're looking at the social, and then you're looking at the economic. Okay. And so it's the idea that companies, corporates, for-profit entities should not be basing their idea of successful profits purely on the dollar and cents line, right? In their end of year accounts. The idea is that when you are going through that profit consideration, when you are going through your books, you are also accounting for the impact on people, right? And the impact on the planet. Now, it's interesting because professional services firms and financial services firms advise a lot on ESG, right? We advise all our clients on ESG. And we advise on this triple bottom line we're talking about. But again, professional services firms have not been as quick on the uptake. Is it because our consumers are a different breed? So we don't necessarily have the retail consumers who are able to say, I'm not going to buy from that company because they pollute their environment, for example, right? Our customer base, our clients they're in industry, they're more sophisticated, even though they're across several various sectors, right? Yeah. And they have a very different approach. So what is the incentive for the FPS sector to actually start looking at a triple bottom line rather than just a bottom line?
Yeah. There's this saying I really like about money and profit, that anything you look at through the lens of just money isn't truly valuable. Because the reality is, and I'm a chartered accountant, so
you know what you're talking about.
I know, but the economist in me is shouting as well. But the reality is, you must look at the profit, because profit is critical. You must look at the fact that over time, I'm able to sustainably create profits and return on investment for my investors to remain an entity that would survive the test of time. But in reality, I do not think you can totally divulge or divorce your profit-making objective from people and planet. The business is made up of people. The business is made up of the quality of talent you have, is made up of the impact you have, right? And I hear you when you say for FPS, because of the nature of clients we have in the space, it's not really as easy as FMCG, where we'll say, oh, no, we're blacklisting
Exactly. There's no fear of boycott.
No.
And, the reality of corporate beasts is that You keep going until you're stopped.
But that's where advocacy comes in. And there's a global advocacy from different touch points. So you have industry associations like ACCA, ICANN here in Nigeria, pushing their members to say, look, this is a consideration you must have. You have organizations like the World Bank and the United Nations pushing organizations to say, oh, look, you must think of the Sustainable Development Goals as well.
You're completely right. A lot of the time now, if we're being like perfectly honest, we do have, clients who are saying, show us your ESG, right? But for them, what that means, for example, is they will say, what diversity do you have within the firm? What do you do in terms of CSR? And these are not questions we necessarily had to answer before being hired in the past. But now, especially with a lot of the internationals, right, it is becoming more and more important.
Yeah. So in the World Alliance for International Financial Centers, we are members of a working group called Women in Finance. And basically, the idea is advocating for more women to get into finance. And it's not just because we want to balance the gender balance equation or the conversation, but it's because women bring a diversity of ideas. Most women run organizations do better than those run by male.
I wasn't going to say it.
I don't know, but
I wasn't going to be the one to say
it. I'll say it for you. And the reality is we need to encourage more of that type of conversation. So it's doing good, but actually remaining profitable while doing good.
So you've actually given us a beautiful takeaway from today's discussion, right? Which is the idea that you can do good and be profitable, but you have to focus on the doing good.
Yeah.
But the doing good can take on a variety, right, of approaches
And ways and stuff.
Precisely. So I think maybe FPS firms need to start thinking more about that triple bottom line. People, planet, profits. Indeed. And I mean, Templars, like I said, we've always taken the people approach. I do know that we are quite sustainable planet-wise. We're constantly being told not to use so much paper, which is a lawyer's nightmare. We love paper,
True.
But we are trying, so little things like that, right? But at least I know that we can be very focused on the people aspect and the profit aspect at the same time, and then build in that consideration of the planet. You know?
And planet is key, because if we don't have a planet, we don't have any
there's nothing, right?
And this is a good segue to talk about COP28 and the fact that EnterpriseNGR is also participating strongly via the World Alliance for Finance in COP28 and pushing solid conversations with respect to climate finance and the green economy as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's something that in this part of the world, unfortunately, we've neglected for a long time.
Yep.
So it was really good, recently to see African leaders actually take that stand regarding COP and, just have more of a stronger voice. And that's the planet element of our triple bottom line.
True.
So I think the reality is there is actually a lot that financial and professional services firms can do in terms of creating social impact, whilst at the same time keeping an eye on the bottom line. And putting in place those sorts of strategies is what will help to build a sustainable and responsible business.
Yes, indeed.
On that note, I have to thank you very much for joining us today, Lami. It's been a thrilling discussion, and we'll have to continue this somewhere else because there's still a lot more to say. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Templars Through the Line, our responsible business podcast. We've spent the episode talking about social impact and the bottom line, and taking a good look at how financial and professional services firms can actually create social impact whilst also making a profit. Stay tuned for our next episode.